Columbus proved the Earth isn't flat. The source of this untrue fact is, yet again, another author writing a book about things that never happened to real people. This time, it's Washington Irvine and his book, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus, published in 1828. Though the book is now considered a fictional biography, Irvine claimed the book was historically accurate. He says, quote, "In the execution of this work, I have avoided indulging in mere speculation or general reflections." End quote. And yet, Irvine perpetrated the myth that Europeans believed the Earth was flat until Columbus sailed west. Critics have argued that Irvine wrote his book to push an American nationalist agenda. Nationalism was a common theme in the 19th century, where concepts such as manifest destiny originated. In Irvine's mind, he probably didn't think he was lying or even stretching the truth. He likely either convinced himself his arguments were valid or read into the historical data what he wanted it to mean in concordance with his biases. In an attempt to make Columbus's voyage more heroic, Irvine wrote that Columbus risked being penalized for heterodoxy, for sailing west and disproving the traditionally held belief that the Bible endorsed a flat earth. In reality, no well-educated person in Europe at the time thought the earth was flat. There's no data to say what uneducated people thought. Apparently, there was a 3rd century Christian who believed the earth was flat. His name was Lactantius, and he wrote of the absurdity of thinking that there are those who walk with their heels upward and their heads hanging down. Irvine also insinuates that St. Augustine endorsed a flat earth, but no data supports that claim. The most glaring problem with the claim that Columbus proved the earth isn't flat is that even if Earth was flat, sailing west or circumnavigating the globe would not be impossible. This only makes sense if north was a point directly on the edge of a flat Earth rather than somewhere in the middle of it. If the magnetic or geographic North Pole is in the center of Earth, sailing west only makes you go in a circle. But if the North Pole is on the edge of Earth, sailing west would drive you toward its edge. Although virtually nobody, including Columbus, thought the Earth was flat in 1492, Columbus held some thoughts about the globe that were far from correct. Eratosthenes famously calculated the circumference of Earth in the 2nd century BCE to an error of less than 1%. However, Columbus preferred the measurements made by the Persian cartographer Abu al-Abbas Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Kathir al-Farghani. Al-Farghani's calculation of the nautical mile was about 5.5% smaller than it truly is. Columbus compounded this small error with an even larger one. Although different people use measurements by the same name, in the past, each region had its own value for that measurement. This is part of the reason behind the myth of Napoleon being short. Columbus assumed Al-Farghani was measuring in Roman miles when he was actually using Persian miles. The Persian mile is nearly 50% larger than the Roman mile. Together, these errors led Columbus to believe Earth was 25% smaller than it truly is. And it gets more complicated. A straight westerly line from Portugal to Japan is roughly 11,500 miles. If we assume Earth is as small as Columbus thought, that distance shrinks to about 8,800 miles. That is still much too far of a journey across an uncharted ocean that was assumed to be empty. However, Columbus didn't think that it was that far. Columbus worked off of maps made by an Italian cartographer named Paolo de Pozzi Toscanelli, who believed in Marco Polo's exaggerated claims about the size of Asia. According to Toscanelli's maps, Japan was slightly farther west of where Mexico in reality lies. So, according to Columbus's model of the globe, this would make Japan a mere 4,200 miles from Portugal. While Columbus was a skillful navigator, he seemed to rely mostly on his intuition than technical skills. He writes in his journal about calculating his position after landing using a quadrant and getting a reading of about 40 degrees north. In reality, he was at about 21 degrees, and he blamed the quadrant, not himself. Some additional blunders ended up in dumb luck. Japan did not trade goods along the Silk Route. Marco Polo never reached Japan, but told stories of it from others who had also told stories. Based on these claims, Toscanelli indicated on his map that Japan stretched from above the Tropic of Cancer nearly to the equator. This isn't even remotely close. Japan lies entirely above 30 degrees north. Columbus was aiming for land in completely the wrong direction and still managed to land somewhere. Columbus first petitioned Queen Isabella in 1486. Her advisors informed her that Columbus was hopelessly wrong about the size of the earth. Still, she gave him an allowance in an attempt to keep Columbus from taking his ideas elsewhere. Then, in January 1492, Isabella agreed to sanction and fund his proposed expedition. She wasn't convinced the payoff would be great, but the difference between the best and worst case scenarios was vast, with the worst case scenario having almost no effect on Spain or the royal family. Through the dumbest of all luck, Columbus landed in the Bahamas, a mere 3,800 miles from Portugal. In other words, he got the right answer using the wrong formula. Not even in Isabella's wildest dreams could she have imagined the riches they reaped in the New World, which had been occupied for at least 14,000 years. Although Columbus didn't think the Earth was flat or prove that it wasn't, he did make a supposed discovery about the shape of the Earth, if only in his mind. Due to either a failure with the technology or his ability to properly read it, Columbus came to the conclusion that Earth was shaped like a pear or a spherical breast with a nipple. His instruments were telling him the sea below him was angling upward toward the sky, and he chose to believe he had discovered the entrance to paradise. This bulge represented the part of Earth that thrust upward toward the heaven, thus the entrance to paradise. Bonus fact that isn't true, his name was not Christopher Columbus. His name was Cristoforo Colombo. Sometime before he set sail on his maiden voyage, he changed his name to Cristobal de Colon. Christopher Columbus is the Anglicanization of Christophorus Columbus, the Latin translation of his given name. Columbus discovered America. Considering the magnitude of his error before setting sail, Christopher Columbus was incredibly lucky. There was no reason to assert any land existed anywhere between Spain and Asia to the west. The only Europeans who knew otherwise were the Vikings, but their culture was basically extinct, and nobody else seemed to know or believe the Viking stories. He could just as easily have died, along with his crew, in the vast emptiness of the ocean. Then again, it could have all gone much better for him. Columbus demanded and was promised a 10% share of the wealth he found. This would have been enormous wealth, but he never saw the full amount. His competency as governor of the lands he sailed to was so terrible, and his cruelty to the indigenous people was so revolting that the Spanish crown removed him from power. He was also arrested at one point, and Columbus was never paid all of his dues. As an example of his cruelty, the forced labor he inflicted on the Taínos and the Caribs was so appalling that they deliberately destroyed their own food stores and fields. It was a deliberate suicide designed to guarantee that no future members of the group would be subjected to the brutal conditions. As many as 50,000 of them perished. Above all else, the central problem with the claim that Columbus discovered America is not only did Columbus not discover America, he didn't discover anything. Christopher Columbus landed on inhabited lands that had been occupied for thousands of years. But even if we modify the claim to say he was the first European to do these things, this is still false. America is not a place, but many places. Typically, when people say America, they mean North America or the United States. Though Columbus made 4 voyages to the Americas, he never once landed on North American soil. Columbus first landed on a tiny island in the Bahamas called Guanahini by its residents, the Lucayan people. Columbus renamed the island San Salvador. On his 3rd and 4th expeditions, Columbus set foot in present-day Venezuela, making him the first outsider since Leif Erikson to touch the mainland of the Americas. On his 4th voyage, Columbus landed in, among other places, present-day Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. You may be scoffing at my claim that Columbus never touched North American soil at this point, but many consider Central America to be distinct from North America. However, if we say there is only mainland North America and South America and no Central America, Columbus still was not the first European to land there. I already spoiled this, but Leif Erikson landed in present-day Newfoundland just under 500 years before Columbus. The details of his landing are sparse, but archaeological evidence proves there was a temporary settlement at the northern tip of Newfoundland. On the surface, it's extremely puzzling that Vikings never settled in Newfoundland, considering it had better climate and far more resources than Greenland. In fact, the Vikings continued making trips to Newfoundland and the surrounding area to restock their Greenland settlements with timber, hides, and other goods for 300 years. Why not just stay in Newfoundland? One reason is Newfoundland is 1,000 miles from the Greenland settlements. Because the Viking settlements at Greenland were already strapped for resources, the trip to Newfoundland was extremely difficult. A permanent settlement requires resources for making tools. The Vikings would have to either make those extra tools in Greenland and take them with them, or clear their Greenland settlement and take it all to Newfoundland. The latter option meant the Vikings would be isolated in Newfoundland, as they would be destroying their refueling and resupplying station to Iceland, as well as to Newfoundland from Iceland. Another reason was the mild climate at the time. Greenland was still challenging, but the benefits of staying in Greenland, where they knew they could make a living, were too great to risk leaving for Newfoundland, or Vinland, as they called it. Probably the most significant reason is clashes with the native people. Lethal clashes are documented in 2 Viking sagas, Eric the Red's saga and Saga of the Greenlanders. Thorvald, Eric the Red's son and Leif Erikson's brother, was killed during the first expedition. Eric the Red never himself traveled to Newfoundland. I recommend Collapse by Jared Diamond if you want to learn more about the Viking settlements and many others that ultimately failed. Perhaps you've heard of the Kensington Runestone. This is an artifact that was found in Kensington, which is now Alexandria, Minnesota, in 1898. The runestone tells a very brief story of Viking settlers who, after returning from fishing, find 10 of their men dead. The date, 1362, is carved into the runestone. It's fake. The most damning giveaway is that date. The problem is not the date itself, but how it is written. Nordic numbers are similar to Roman numerals, as in there's no such thing as a placeholder. You don't write 25 as IIV. II is 2 and V is 5. IIV would be 3, but you're actually supposed to write it as 3 I's. 25 would be XXV, which basically means 10 plus 10 plus 5. Whoever carved the Kensington runestone made this same error. They used 4 symbols to write 1362, which is not how Nordic runes work. Even if the Vikings never landed in Newfoundland, and we say Central America is part of North America, Columbus still would not have been the first European to land there. John Cabot, an Italian-born British explorer, landed in Newfoundland in 1497. Like Columbus, Cabot thought he could reach Asia by sailing west. Cabot returned to England firmly believing he had landed in Asia. Columbus went to his grave believing that he had done the same. Cabot returned with little of value, and upon his second expedition, he disappeared and was never heard from again.